The afternoon sun cast a warm, golden glow over a quiet suburban street, a picture of perfect peace. For one black woman, a resident of the community, it was a moment to savor, a deep breath of fresh air, a brief escape from the indoors. This simple, everyday act of stepping outside her own home, however, was about to be violently stolen from her. Without warning, the tranquility shattered. A neighbor, a woman whose demeanor was anything but neighborly, approached with an aggressive, confrontational energy. The exchange was not a polite inquiry, but an immediate accusation, a venomous declaration that the woman didn't belong in the very neighborhood she called home. It was a gut-wrenching scenario fueled by blatant racial profiling, where the color of her skin was deemed an offense in her own front yard. The situation escalated with terrifying speed. Words failed to satisfy the accuser, now widely dubbed HOA Karen by outraged online commentators. Instead of reason, she brandished a can of pepper spray. In a cruel and humiliating act, she unleashed a burning chemical agent on the unsuspecting woman, an act of assault designed to inflict pain and degradation. The peaceful afternoon was replaced by searing agony and the profound violation of being attacked at her own doorstep. The victim retreated, her eyes burning, her sense of security utterly obliterated. But HOA Karen had made a catastrophic miscalculation. In her bigoted assumption, she had failed to consider who might be inside the house. The victim's husband, hearing the commotion and his wife's distress, rushed to her aid. He was no ordinary man. He was a U.S. Army lieutenant, a leader trained to assess threats and act under extreme pressure. The sight that greeted him was every spouse's nightmare. His wife, in visible pain and trauma, being assaulted by a neighbor on their own property. The soldier's training instantly fused with a husband's fury. What happened next was a masterclass in controlled, righteous force. He did not panic. He did not respond with blind rage. He acted with the precision and authority of his rank. First, he ensured his wife was safe and called 911 immediately, reporting the assault with cold, clear facts. Then he confronted the aggressor. As she continued her tirade, even attempting to justify her vile actions, he stood his ground. He identified himself not just as a husband, but as a lieutenant in the United States Army, making it unequivocally clear that he and his family were not just residents, but a respected part of the community she claimed to protect. The arrival of the police shifted the dynamic entirely. The Karen, perhaps expecting sympathy, began weaving a tale of fear and falsehoods. But her story crumbled against the unshakable testimony of a military officer and his traumatized wife. The pepper spray canister, still in her possession, was all the evidence needed. The twist was complete. The person she assumed was an outsider was married to a man who embodied service and honor, and the person she assumed would be powerless had the unwavering authority of truth and justice on her side. The lieutenant's powerful presence ensured the assailant was charged appropriately, turning her from aggressor into defendant in a matter of minutes. The story, which began as a shocking tale of racial hatred, became an empowering saga of accountability. It was a stark reminder that prejudice is not only morally bankrupt, but often strategically foolish, and that behind every individual targeted by hate stands a community, a family, and very often a hero waiting to ensure justice is served. Every neighborhood has one, a self-appointed sentinel of the suburbs, a zealot of the zoning laws, a person who confuses their own biases with the community covenant. In this particular tree-lined development, that title was held unequivocally by a woman the residents had privately nicknamed HOA Karen. She was a familiar, albeit dreaded, sight, patrolling the sidewalks in her pristine athleisure wear, her eyes constantly scanning for infractions, both real and imagined. Her reputation was built on a foundation of unsolicited citations for garbage cans left out an hour too long and aggressively worded emails about lawn length. But her specialty was far more insidious, targeting those she personally deemed undesirable. On this otherwise serene afternoon, her radar locked onto a black woman, enjoying a leisurely walk with her dog near the community's manicured green space. The woman was simply present, existing peacefully in the sunshine, a picture of quiet contentment. To Karen, however, her presence was an anomaly, a blot on the landscape that required immediate correction. Instead of a neighborly nod or a smile, Karen's approach was a confrontational march. She cut off the woman's path, her posture rigid with self-righteous authority. The air, once filled with the sounds of birds and rustling leaves, grew thick with tension. "Do you even live here?" The question was a verbal jab, delivered not as curiosity but as an accusation. The woman, taken aback but maintaining her composure, assured her that she did. This only fueled Karen's suspicion. The concept that someone who looked different could legitimately be a resident was apparently beyond her comprehension. "What's your address?" she demanded, her voice sharp, as if she were a law enforcement officer conducting a stop. "I've never seen you before. I'll have to report this to the HOA. The victim of this interrogation remained remarkably calm. She reiterated that she was a resident and firmly stated that she didn't owe a random stranger an explanation or proof of her right to be in her own neighborhood. She was polite but firm, a boundary set against the tide of entitlement. But for a person like Karen, a calm and rational defense is often perceived as a direct challenge. In her distorted worldview, the woman's refusal to cower or immediately comply was proof of her guilt. It confirmed her deep-seated bias. This woman, by virtue of her skin tone, simply didn't look like she belonged. She didn't fit the homogeneous image Karen was determined to enforce. The rule book in Karen's mind was written not by any official homeowners association, but by prejudice. The civility of the exchange evaporated. The woman's dignified resistance was a spark to the tinder of Karen's bigotry. Her face flushed with frustration that her unearned authority was being questioned. The logical part of the conversation was over. Reason had left, and in its place, a raw, unfiltered hostility surged forth. This was a pivotal moment. The threshold between a miserable encounter and a life-altering assault. The verbal confrontation was no longer satisfying to Karen. She needed to exert control, to dominate, to punish this woman for the perceived audacity of existing in a space Karen had claimed as her own to police. Her hand, which had been gesturing emphatically, now dipped toward her purse or pocket. The peaceful afternoon, the chirping birds, the gentle breeze, it all faded into a silent, horrifying backdrop for what came next. Things were about to take a violent and disturbing turn. All because one woman believed her perception of who belonged was more important than another's right to simply walk her dog in peace. The calm of the afternoon was shattered not by a shout, but by a hiss. What had begun as a nosy, prejudiced interrogation escalated with terrifying swiftness into violence. As the black woman stood her ground, refusing to justify her existence to a self-appointed vigilante, HOA Karen's face contorted with rage. Rational thought was gone, replaced by a venomous need to assert dominance. Her hand dove into her designer handbag, not for a phone to call some fictional HOA security, but for a small, sleek canister of pepper spray. It was a tool she carried not for legitimate protection, but as a symbol of her perceived authority, a weapon to be wielded against those she deemed unworthy. There was no warning, no raised voice signaling a final chance to retreat. In one fluid, cruel motion, she raised her arm and unleashed a burning stream of chemical agent directly into the woman's face. The effect was instantaneous and horrific. A scream of pure, unadulterated agony tore through the peaceful neighborhood air. The woman's world dissolved into a white-hot inferno of pain. Her eyes, seared and blinded, slammed shut as tears streamed down her cheeks, offering no relief, only a scalding mixture of moisture and toxin. The acrid smell filled her nostrils and lungs, each gasp for air a desperate, choking effort that only intensified the burning. Staggering backward, she lost all sense of direction, her only anchor the leash in her hand and the panicked whimpers of her dog. She was utterly vulnerable, humiliated, and in excruciating pain on the sidewalk of the community she called home. The commotion acted like a shockwave. Neighbors' watering plants froze. A man washing his car dropped a sponge. The sound of screaming and a dog barking brought them running from their yards and peering from their windows. The scene they witnessed was one of brutal, unprovoked assault. A small crowd began to gather, their voices a mixture of horror and outrage. "What are you doing?" one man yelled, rushing to help the stumbling victim. "Stop it, are you insane?" shouted another from her porch. The distinct sound of someone dialing 911 crackled through the air, a voice urgently reporting, "There's a woman attacking another woman with pepper spray on Elm Court." Yet, Amidst the chaos and the clear evidence of her crime, Karen stood her ground, not with remorse, but with a defiant, chilling entitlement. As the victim gasped and wept, Karen pointed an accusatory finger, her voice rising above the murmurs of the crowd to justify her brutality. She was trespassing, she declared, as if this fabricated crime warranted a chemical attack. I was defending myself, she insisted, her voice shrill, despite the fact the victim had been retreating, blinded and incapacitated. But her audience was no longer listening. Her words rang hollow and grotesque. The truth was painfully, undeniably clear to every witness. This was not self-defense. The victim had posed zero physical threat. Her only offense was her presence and her refusal to be intimidated by bigoted questions. This was calculated harassment. This was a violent assault, a hateful act intended to inflict pain and reinforce a disgusting message. You do not belong here. The canister in Karen's hand, the victim's agonized cries, and a complete lack of any credible threat laid bare the ugly reality. The weapon wasn't just a pepper spray. It was a prejudice that guided her hand. She had not been protecting the community. She had been poisoning it, all to satisfy her own warped sense of superiority. The neighborhood watch had become a neighborhood attack, and everyone present knew exactly who the real aggressor was. The sound of his wife's scream was a siren that tore through the lieutenant's soul, a sound more piercing and urgent than any battlefield alarm. He was at the window in an instant, his soldier's instincts overriding the domestic calm of a moment before. The scene that greeted him was one from a nightmare. His wife, the center of his world, doubled over on the sidewalk, her face contorted in a massive agony, hands clawing at her burning eyes while her terrified dog circled her helplessly. He didn't run. He moved with a terrifying controlled velocity. In seconds, he was at her side, his training in battlefield triage kicking in. He gently but firmly pulled her hands away from her face, his voice a low, steady anchor in her storm of pain. I'm here. I've got you. Don't rub it. His eyes, however, were already scanning the scene, absorbing every detail with the lethal calm of a predator assessing a threat. Neighbors, their voices overlapping in a chorus of outrage, pointed toward the epicenter of the chaos. A woman standing with her arms crossed, her face a rigid mask of self-righteous indignation. It was her, a man said, his voice shaking. She just sprayed her for no reason. That was all the confirmation he needed. The lieutenant's protective love for his wife fused with a cold, disciplined fury. He handed his wife's leash to a nearby neighbor with a terse, "Please, stay with her." Then he turned. His posture straightened, his shoulders went back, and the air around him seemed to crackle with a new, formidable energy. He walked toward Karen not with the frantic anger of a civilian, but with the deliberate, intimidating purpose of a ranking officer. He stopped directly in front of her, his gaze unwavering. The crowd fell silent, bearing witness. His voice, when he spoke, was not a yell. It was a firm, low, and commanding instrument that carried absolute authority, each word a hammer blow of truth. You attacked my wife. It was a statement of fact, not a question. She lives here. You had no right. Karen, confronted by this sudden and powerful presence, flinched. Her bravado wavered. She tried to backpedal, her words tumbling out in a desperate, nasally whine. I was just following the rules. She was trespassing. I felt threatened, but her excuses were pathetic, meaningless sounds against the iron wall of his conviction, and they were immediately drowned out by the tangible evidence materializing around her. From the periphery, phones were raised. I got the whole thing on video, one woman announced, her voice loud and clear. Me too, said another. From the moment you started yelling at her. In the digital age, her reign of terror had been documented by a dozen citizen journalists, and her lies were now powerless against the irrefutable truth captured on camera. The arrival of the police sealed her fate. The lieutenant immediately identified himself, not to boast, but to establish credibility and ensure there would be no ambiguity in the reporting. He was calm, precise, and factual. The officers, after hearing the initial accounts, didn't need to investigate who done it. They were directed to the evidence. They reviewed the damning footage on a neighbor's phone, their expressions hardening as they watched the unprovoked assault. While Karen was read her rights, the lieutenant's focus returned to his wife. He ensured she received immediate medical attention, his soldiers' efficiency navigating the aftermath. Physically, the doctors would confirm her eyes would heal. The pepper spray's effects, though brutal, were temporary. But as he held her trembling hand, he knew the deeper injury was far more insidious. The emotional trauma, the profound humiliation of being violently rejected and assaulted in the place she should feel safest, in front of people who were supposed to be her community, was a wound that would not simply wash away. It was a scar etched into her sense of security, a memory that would forever darken the simple act of walking out her own front door. The battle on the sidewalk was over, but the war for his wife's peace of mind had just begun. The wheels of justice, once set in motion by the damning cell phone footage and the unwavering testimony of a military officer, turned with satisfying speed. The fallout for HOA Karen was not just swift. It was a comprehensive unraveling of the false authority she had so zealously cultivated. The police on the scene, presented with incontrovertible evidence, moved past warnings and directly to an arrest. She was formally charged with assault, the weight of the legal system now squarely upon her shoulders, transforming her from a self-styled enforcer into a criminal defendant. But the consequences extended far beyond the courtroom. The local homeowners association, horrified to have its name associated with such a blatant act of bigoted violence, moved quickly to contain the public relations disaster. They issued a swift and unambiguous public statement, vehemently distancing the organization from her actions. The individual involved acted alone and in no way represents the values or the authority of the HOA. It read, "We condemn this behavior in the strongest possible terms." The very institution she claimed to defend had publicly cast her out. Her social standing in the community evaporated overnight. The silent majority of neighbors, who had perhaps previously tolerated her nitpicking with weary eye rolls, were now galvanized into action. The unprovoked cruelty they witnessed crossed a line that petty complaints never could. A petition began to circulate, not just criticizing her, but formally demanding her immediate removal from any official or unofficial role within the HOA. Doors that were once open to her now closed. Faces that once offered polite smiles now looked away in cold disdain. She became a pariah in her own paradise, exiled by the very community she had sought to purify. Most importantly, the incident transcended the boundaries of their suburb. Captured on video and shared online, the story went viral, sparking a national conversation that echoed far beyond HOA bylaws. News segments and social media threads lit up with discussions about the insidious nature of racial profiling, the toxic privilege that makes someone believe they're the arbiter who belongs, and the frightening escalation from nasty words to chemical weapons. People ask the essential questions. Why is a white woman's discomfort so often weaponized? Why was a weapon her first resort instead of a simple, neighborly conversation? The story became a stark case study in how everyday racism operates and escalates. In beautiful contrast, the black woman and her Army lieutenant husband were met with an overwhelming wave of support. A GoFundMe set up to cover any medical or legal expenses was quickly flooded with donations. Comments and messages poured in from across the country, praising the victim for her incredible dignity and strength in the face of such hatred. Her husband was universally lauded for his remarkable composure, a testament to his training and character. He had protected his family, ensured justice was pursued, and never once lowered himself to his attacker's level. Their grace under fire turned the story of victimhood into one of powerful resilience. And Karen? She learned the hardest of lessons. That in the modern world, actions have inescapable consequences. The moment of control she so desperately sought, the brandishing of the pepper spray, the delivery of her punishment, was captured, rebroadcast, and dissected by millions. It was her own hand that constructed the platform for her global humiliation. What she intended as a show of power to one woman became a viral exhibit of her own bigotry, exposing her behavior not just to her immediate neighbors, but to the world. Her name, forever tied to the HOA Karen moniker, became synonymous with racist entitlement gone horribly wrong, a permanent cautionary tale etched into the digital record. This story isn't just about one HOA Karen gone too far. It's about what happens when prejudice meets entitlement, It's about how quickly an ordinary day can turn dangerous. And it's about the importance of standing up for what's right. So, what do you think? Should Karen face jail time for her actions? Or is losing her standing in the neighborhood punishment enough? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. And if you enjoy stories like this, real events that expose the shocking truth behind everyday situations, make sure to like, share, and subscribe, because sometimes reality is more unbelievable than fiction.